This is Nightly Business Report with Tyler Matheson and Susie Guerra. Brought to you in part by
TheStreet.com, featuring Stephanie Link, who shares her investment strategies, stock picks, and market insights with Action Alerts Plus, the multi-million-dollar portfolio she manages with Jim Cramer. You can learn more at TheStreet.com/NBR.
Spring surprise, the economy adds way more jobs than everyone thought, so why did stocks fall? And what should investors do now, if anything? Applying pressure, Susie talks with the activist investor who wants Coca-Cola to can its controversial pay plan. The right fit. Meet the entrepreneur who turned her desire to find the perfect dress into her perfect business. All that and more tonight on Nightly Business Report for Friday, May 2nd. Good evening, everybody. I'm Tyler Matheson. Susie Garib is on assignment and will join us later in the program. A blowout April jobs report to start with. A lot more Americans getting back to work last month. Here are the numbers. 288,000 jobs added and the nation's unemployment rate falling to 6.3%. That's a drop of nearly 0.5% and the lowest jobless rate in nearly 6 years. Economists say it's an encouraging sign that employers have finally thawed out from the grips of this winter's brutally cold and snowy weather and have begun putting more people on their payrolls. But the news wasn't all good, with hundreds of thousands of people leaving the workforce or giving up on finding a job altogether. Hampton Pearson has more now on April's non-farm jobs report, including where the jobs are and the challenges the long-term unemployed still face.
In April, job growth increased at the fastest pace in more than 2.5 years, and the unemployment rate fell to a 5.5-year low. With upward revisions for February and March, job growth for the last 3 months has averaged 238,000. At a Rose Garden news conference with German Chancellor Angela Merkel, President Obama welcomed the news but said there's still more to be done.
All told, our businesses have now created 9.2 million new jobs over 50 consecutive months of job growth. The grit and determination of the American people are moving us forward, but we have to keep a relentless focus on job creation and creating more opportunities for working families.
April employment gains were broad-based. The private sector generated 273,000 jobs, including 75,000 in professional and business services, which traditionally are among the better-paying jobs. Among the small business success stories, Trunk Club, a Chicago-based members-only men's clothing service. The 4-year-old startup had its best year yet in 2013. Gross sales topped $42 million.
When you sign up for Trunk Club online at trunkclub.com, you get matched with a stylist in one of our offices, and that stylist takes care of you and shepherds you through the process of upgrading your wardrobe.
With more than 100 new hires in the last year, the total workforce now tops 400, including expanding to Dallas and Washington, D.C. Among the new hires, Tasneem Ibu. Since graduating from college last year, she's held several part-time jobs while interviewing constantly for full-time positions.
It is a tough process, and you kind of have to have a little bit of a thick skin about it. Going to lots of different interviews, and you meet a lot of different people and see a lot of different companies. But I think at the same time, it's a little bit of a blessing because you kind of get to see all the different companies that wouldn't necessarily work out for you by doing all of those interviews. But it's tough.
But the April jobs report shows millions of job seekers still on the sidelines. While the 6.3% unemployment rate is the lowest in more than 5 years, it happened because the labor force shrank by more than 800,000. And the labor force participation rate fell to just under 63%, the lowest level since last December.
You look at the participation rates over the last few months, and they bounce up, they bounce down. What I saw about last month's numbers is that the number of discouraged workers did not go up.
The Labor Department says 3.5 million Americans have been out of work for 6 months or longer. That's the lowest number in 5 years. But that decline is due to many Americans who have lost their long-term unemployment benefits since the start of the year. For Nightly Business Report, I'm Hampton Pearson in Washington.
While April's job growth was strong, wages were stagnant. In our continuing series on where the jobs are, we take you to one company that's bringing high-paying jobs to a region that's been bleeding jobs for decades. Mary Thompson reports from just outside of Albany in Malta, New York.
When GlobalFoundries opened the doors of its $8 billion chip-making plant in upstate New York 2 years ago, it had to import half of its 2,200-person workforce. Now it's looking to add another 600 to 800 workers by year-end.
We are focused on local hiring.
GlobalFoundries head of government affairs Mike Russo says it's not an easy task in the world of high-tech manufacturing. Most of it's done overseas, so skilled workers in the U.S. are scarce. But if GlobalFoundries can find them, it pays them well.
I can tell you that an average salary, high to low end, is about $90,000 for a roll-up for a salary.
To prime the labor pump, the contract manufacturer partners with local community colleges on training programs and draws from the four-year colleges in the region. Kevin Hanley is a recent graduate of Rensselaer Polytech and a new hire at GlobalFoundries. The engineer is happy to have found a job close to home.
My main goal was to, try to stay local in the area, so that was a big thing for me.
Getting GlobalFoundries to build the plant in Malta was a big deal for the state. Research shows every job at a chip-making plant results in 5 new jobs in the local community. That's the payoff New York is looking for from the grants and tax incentives it gave the firm.
It was in total over $1 billion package, so it was substantial.
Still, money to build a plant doesn't make it easier to build a workforce. GlobalFoundries is in need of technicians, the Mr. Fix-Its of the 1,000-step process it takes to make computer chips for clients including Qualcomm and Broadcom. Technicians typically have associate's degrees, but more importantly, training director Don Garrison says they have the mechanical and critical thinking skills that are needed to keep the very expensive automated assembly line on track.
We're talking anywhere from $2 to $100 million a piece per piece of equipment. Every minute that we're not running production is revenue for the company.
Jabez Cruz is a new hire that brings 20 years experience as a technician. Though as technology changes quickly, so too do the skills needed for the job.
It's almost like learning how to walk. You first start crawling, then you start walking, then you start running.
A small step in building a high-tech workforce at home. For Nightly Business Report, I'm Mary Thompson in Malta, New York.
To read more about GlobalFoundries and its high-tech workforce, head to our website, nbr.com. Well, with that April jobs report and news that U.S. factory orders rose more than 1% in March, you'd think the markets would really take off today, but jitters about escalating violence between Russia and Ukraine had investors on edge, and that kept stocks on the downside, boosting gold prices, by the way, by nearly $20 an ounce, highest price there in a month. Now, wrapping up a volatile week on Wall Street, one that saw the Dow close at a fresh all-time high on Wednesday, the blue-chip Dow stocks ended the day 46 points lower. NASDAQ lost 3 today, S&P was down by 2. For the week, each of those 3 measures was up by about 1%. Ann Milletti joins us now to talk more about today's jobs report and the market. She's a senior portfolio manager with Wells Fargo Advantage Funds. Ann, welcome. Good to have you with us. Why didn't the markets, both stock and bond, really react to this jobs number in a more sort of enthusiastic way?
I think the first initial reaction was very bullish, and then there was some, things that the market looked further at. Probably the fact that the participation rate did go down, and also the the earnings stayed flat. So the fact that you had a lot of job creation, but it didn't increase earnings, that was another probably little nit to the number. Overall, though, this was a pretty positive number. I think it does show that there's been an inflection in the job market.
A lot of people, I don't know whether you're among them, think that the market can move higher from here. But I note that I was looking today at where we are year to date for the 3 major barometers, NASDAQ, the Dow, and the S&P. And there's a little bit of a gain in a couple of, but basically the Dow's flat. Do you expect the market will go higher as we go into this, usually a sort of a seasonally bumpy period?
It is a seasonally bumpy period. It's been bumpy all year, though, Tyler. You're right, it's flat, but we've kind of, made a lot of movements in both directions to be flattish. I think what the market may be struggling with is a good economy, an economy that may be reaccelerating. We've seen it, the jobs data today, that's one indicator. But an accelerating economy may not necessarily mean that it's great for the market.
All right, Ann, let's try and make some people some money, shall we? Your first stock pick this evening is Johnson Controls. You got a $58 price target on it. Why do you like it?
Yeah, I really like this company because it is exposed to commercial construction. It's an area that we think has been really spend in that area, non-residential construction has been hurt by the recession. It really never came back. We're starting to see signs that it is coming back. Johnson Controls has a new management team. They're repositioning their business. Their primary business in the past used to be the automobile space, and now they're also in building efficiency, which means controlling lighting, heat, other things within a building. That business is doing well, and we think they can gain share throughout the next 12 months.
I think of them as tied to the automobile business, but you make a good point there that they're branching out.
Yeah.
Let's go on to your next one, which is Steel Dynamics, $23 price target here.
Again, an underperformer year to date, but again, also tied to commercial construction. Steel is a big, obviously, a material component that goes into commercial construction. This is a good management team that's executed in the past. They've gotten their cost structure in line, so now it's about top line growth. We think we'll start to see that before year end.
And Thoracic is your final one tonight, $44 price target on that company.
Yep, Thoratec is a really interesting company in that it makes heart pumps. So people that are going through heart failure that may, in the end, need a heart transplant. It used to be a heart pump that was used to bridge a patient between the time period where they were waiting for a heart. But now it's also being used in destination therapy, which means even if you don't want a heart transplant or may not be able to get one, it's a device that you can live many more years with, and the devices keep getting better, and the quality of life with them continues to improve.
And I misspoke. I called it thoracic. I called it thoracic. I must have been thinking of that great movie, Thoracic Park, right, Ann?
You know what, Tyler? You're not that far off because it's a thoracic surgeon that would actually implant this device, so you're good.
Any disclosures to tell us about and share? How about do you have with these stocks?
We own these stocks in our mutual funds. I don't own them personally.
All right, Ann Maletti of Wells Fargo Advantage Funds, thanks very much.
Thank you, Tyler.
You bet. Oil giant Chevron out with earnings this morning, and profits plunged last quarter. They fell 27% as global oil prices weakened and rugged winter weather crimped oil and gas production here in the U.S. Don't feel too bad, though. Chevron still managed to earn $4.5 billion in just the first 3 months of the year. Shares fell a fraction today. 124.72 was the close. Federal government is looking to boost gasoline stockpiles in the Northeast. The U.S. Energy Department wants to build the area's first ever regional gasoline reserves, one near New York Harbor and the other in New England, to make sure we'll never again see the gas lines and fuel shortages that hit the region in the aftermath of Superstorm Sandy back in 2012. The fuel is expected to be available by the end of this summer, which is the height of the Atlantic hurricane season, and the facilities are expected to cost taxpayers a total of about $200 million. Well, the new General Motors was back in bankruptcy court today, trying to distance itself from the old GM. The automaker is asking a judge to enforce a ban on the dozens of lawsuits against the company for claims related to accidents and deaths that happened before it exited bankruptcy protection in 2009, all involving cars with faulty ignition switches that later were recalled. And just today, a Texas lawyer representing families who lost loved ones or suffered injuries because of those defective ignition switches, well, they met with GM's compensation czar, Ken Feinberg, to try to resolve all outstanding claims. Well, Detroit is making some progress in its struggle to emerge from bankruptcy. The Motor City's largest retiree group has agreed to a pension cut. The group's 8,000 members will give up its annual cost of living adjustments in a deal that could help speed up Detroit's exit from bankruptcy protection. The White House is urging some of America's top executives to skip an economic conference in St. Petersburg, Russia, later this month. Treasury Secretary Jack Lew and other officials are reaching out to CEOs to cancel plans to attend, saying their participation won't send a good signal to Russian President Vladimir Putin in light of the economic sanctions the U.S. has imposed against Moscow for its incursion into Ukraine. Among the executives canceling their plans so far, Morgan Stanley CEO James Gorman, Visa's Charlie Scharf, Alcoa's Klaus Kleinfeld, and PepsiCo's Indra Nooyi. And still ahead, we will head to Omaha, the site of this weekend's much-anticipated Berkshire Hathaway annual meeting. Part annual meeting, part festival. Susie's there. She's talking with a man who's created quite a stir in the past few weeks.
Coming up, we talk with the activist investor who's turning up the heat on Warren Buffett to do something about Coca-Cola's controversial executive pay plan.
Another swing and a miss. AstraZeneca turns down Pfizer's latest takeover pitch, and that is where we begin tonight's market focus. Yesterday, we told you that Pfizer had upped its offer for its British rival to $106 billion, and it increased the cash portion of the proposal to sweeten the deal. That after two failed attempts by Pfizer to interest the company in a combination. AstraZeneca's board said the offer still substantially undervalued its company. Shares of Pfizer fell more than 1% to $30.75. AstraZeneca also down a fraction today to $81.02. Shares of Endocyte took a big hit in today's session on the news the ovarian cancer drug it is co-developing with Merck failed in a late-stage trial. The treatment didn't meet the study goals of slowing progression of the disease. Merck fell just 2% to $58.22, but Endocyte plunged 62% to $6.62. CVS Caremark saw its first quarter earnings jump 18% as generic drugs and an acquisition helped the drugstore chain weather a harsh winter. Earnings did fall slightly short of expectations, but CVS reaffirmed its 2014 earnings forecast. Shares up 1%, $73.86, the finish there. Newell Rubbermaid's first quarter profit fell short of estimates on a sales decline in most of its units, especially its baby business, which was hit by a product recall earlier this year. The consumer products maker reaffirmed its full-year forecast, upped its quarterly dividend to 17 cents a share. Still, the stock was off about 4%, $28.88 was where it ended the day. And Skechers is considering buying a stake in the Los Angeles Clippers basketball team. Current owner Donald Sterling was banned from the NBA earlier this week after making racist remarks. The league is putting plans in motion to try to get Sterling to sell the team. Shares of Skechers fell almost 5% today to $39.93. Well, Warren Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway saw its first quarter operating profit dip 6.5% to $3.5 billion. That was slightly below estimates, but the company did a little shopping today nonetheless with its energy unit, buying the Canadian utility AltaLink for around $3 billion. The electricity transmission company will still be based in Alberta and will operate as a separate unit of Buffett's main holding company. And Warren Buffett is sure to be asked about that tomorrow at the annual Berkshire Hathaway shareholder meeting out in Omaha. Another hot topic, Coca-Cola and its lavish executive pay plan. As Coke's largest shareholder, Buffett recently abstained when it came time to vote on that pricey plan, but since then, he's come out saying he didn't like it. The person at the center of all this is David Winters, a longtime shareholder of both Berkshire and Coke. And Susie Garib caught up with him earlier today at the site of Saturday's big meeting.
David, from what we're hearing now, it looks like Warren Buffett is trying to convince Coca-Cola's board to revise its whole compensation plan. You've had a lot to do with all of this. Are you satisfied? I mean, what more do you need to hear from Buffett tomorrow?
I think there's a long way to go on Coca-Cola because there's been no further information. There have been some rumblings, but there's been nothing tangible. The plan is now widely accepted as being excessive and bad. And I think there's some real governance issues at Coca-Cola for the way they've behaved.
You know, as you know, very few people dare to criticize Warren Buffett, and yet you've been calling him out publicly on this very controversial issue. Have you heard from him?
Well, you know, there's been sort of a vague conversation.
But you haven't talked to him directly.
No.
But if you were to speak with him directly, what would you say?
Well, basically, what gives? You know, look, I believe the gospel of Berkshire Hathaway. You know, I grew up with this. And then, you know, really, unfortunately, when it's happened at Coca-Cola, I think Warren has tried, and I think he will try more. But there's more work to do, And, you know, I think his heart and his wallet and his mind are in the right place.
So you've been a long-time Berkshire shareholder, and Berkshire stock over the past couple of years has not been doing as well as the broader market. How do you feel about that?
Well, look, Berkshire Hathaway's been an amazing success story, you know, great American success story. But the problem is it's enormous now. And that the returns in the future, or even in the immediate past, cannot be as good, just mathematically, Susie, as they have been, you know, going back 20, 30 years.
David, were you surprised when you heard that Buffett advised his wife to put most of her money in an S&P index fund? You know, how did you feel about that? Is that good advice?
Well, I think really what it is it's an acknowledgement, you know, a public acknowledgement, which is the right way to do it, and, you know, I think very open on Buffett's part, that the returns in the future can't be as good as just being an index investor. And so I think that, unfortunately, you know, the past is not necessarily a prologue, and it's probably very good advice to his wife.
I'd like to get your thoughts on news today that Berkshire is paying $3 billion for a Canadian energy company that's small. Berkshire has something like $50 billion in cash. What do you think of this deal? Will it make a difference for Berkshire? And what do you want Buffett to do with all that money?
It's smart. You know, they're putting money to work at a decent return. You know, cash comes in every day, and they're building out the utility sector. All that money, it's a challenge. It's a beautiful challenge. But putting $50 billion growing every day to work, I think, look, he's got a great record of doing things intelligently with capital. But it again comes back down to that this enormous weight of cash and lower returns makes the future returns lower, Susie.
David, the one issue that always hangs over these meetings is succession. After all, Buffett is almost 84. As an investor, does it trouble you that Buffett has not named who's going to be the next CEO?
Well, I think in a lot of ways he's been very smart not to name the next CEO, because who it would have been 3 years ago is not who it is today. But ultimately, this is going to be an issue. And this is such an enormous, complicated company of who's going to run it. Is it going to be a committee? We already know, and he's flagged, that the returns are going to be lower. And whoever sits in that seat, it's going to be a tough job, because you're going to be endlessly compared to a fellow who's done better than anybody else in the history of commerce.
Coming up, meet the woman who had an idea to change the way people shop for clothing, and then it turned it into a very successful business. Finally tonight, we wrap up this Jobs Friday with our latest bright idea. Ever wish you could buy that dress that just doesn't seem to exist no matter where you look? Here's someone who had that problem and decided to do something about it.
Aubrey Pagano needed something to wear. Her boyfriend's brother was getting married. She'd be meeting the family for the first time.
I thought I had to look great.
Clothes have always meant a lot to Pagano. But this time, she was coming up empty in department stores, boutiques, and even on the internet. Tailors, if they knew how to make a dress, were too expensive. The search nagged at her.
And I was like, I'll just make my dress.
She'd never made one from scratch, but it was so worth it.
And the reaction was so overwhelming, and the questions kept coming about how people could do this, that it sort of clicked in my mind, like, I can't be the only woman who's had this problem.
Customized clothing, an idea that drove Pagano to move in with her parents, save $40,000, and quit her job at Fidelity Investments. She began testing a website, collecting data from 30,000 would-be customers, learning which style tweaks would make them fall in love with and buy a dress from a company she decided to call Bow and Drape. But that was the easy part. Finding someone to make the clothing was the problem.
Again and again and again, all I heard was, this is a stupid idea, it's never gonna work, the industry doesn't work like this.
It didn't, until now. Pagano combed New York's Garment Center looking for a partner. The one-time mecca of American fashion had lost hundreds of thousands of jobs since the 1960s. But even so, it was months before Pagano found Sample Studio, a manufacturer willing to take a chance on her hunch that everyday working women would jump at the chance to express themselves.
I am definitely not a fashionista. I definitely don't like to have someone dictate to me what to buy.
On Bow and Drape, Alice Heathcote and Grace Colleton can have it their way. Where have you heard that one before?
If you think about Burger King in the 1970s, their big campaign was have it your way. And now if you look around, almost every single large chain does that. And so what happened in food, we think will happen in fashion, where really personalization is king, and what you say as a customer goes.
I love a Peter Pan collar, so that's what I'm going to go with.
It's really fun to be able to say, oh, I actually kind of made it myself. I picked the length, I picked the colors.
Within days of ordering, the material is hand-cut and hand-sewn. In less than 2 weeks, it's part of the wardrobe.
You have a different relationship with the clothes. You take a lot more pride in them, more ownership. I think you just feel better in them.
Ready to wear right now is a race to the bottom. Customization is a way for someone to feel connected to the clothes and provide value that didn't exist before.
Now others see the value too. Pagano is seeing competition and some big-name investors. Zappos founder Tony Hsieh led a round of financing worth more than $1 million, giving her cash to expand and enlist a second manufacturer in Las Vegas.
The space is heating up, which overall is a good thing for us because we want people to know that this is doable, that we're changing the way that women shop.
Dresses typically run less than $200. Tops are under $100, and Bow and Drape is helping customers accessorize with 3D printing. Well, that's Nightly Business Report for tonight. I'm Tyler Mathisen. Have a great weekend, everybody. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you back here Monday evening. I'm Tyler Mathisen with a Nightly Business Report news brief. A blowout April jobs report as employers shook off winter's icy grip and put more Americans back to work last month. 288,000 jobs were created in April, and the nation's unemployment rate tumbled to 6.3%, lowest in 5.5 years. One caveat, though, the number of people leaving the workforce or giving up trying to even find a job spiked sharply higher. Despite that, stocks ended lower on jitters about escalating violence between Russia and Ukraine. The Dow off 46 points, the Nasdaq lost 3, the S&P was down by 2. British drug maker AstraZeneca says Pfizer's latest offer to take over the company, a sweetened bid of $106 billion, is still too low. And tune into Nightly Business Report here on your public television station.